At the family dinner, my son-in-law joked, "Too bad you didn't die instead of your mother-in-law. She would have cost us less." Everyone at the table laughed. I stood up, went to the bedroom, and grabbed an envelope I had kept hidden for 4 years. He realized his mistake too late. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. My name is Frank, and at 64 years old, I thought I'd seen the worst of what family could do to each other. I was wrong. It was a Thursday evening in October, the kind where the autumn air carries just enough chill to make you grateful for a warm dinner and good company. I'd been looking forward to our weekly family dinner at Sarah's house all week. These Thursday gatherings had become sacred to me since Martha passed away 4 years ago. They were my lifeline, my reminder that despite losing my wife of 38 years, I still had family who cared about me. Or so I believed. I arrived at Sarah's colonial-style home in Westfield at exactly 6 o'clock, as I always did. My daughter had inherited Martha's punctuality, along with her green eyes and stubborn streak. The smell of roast chicken and rosemary potatoes greeted me at the door, and for a moment, everything felt normal, safe. "Dad, you're right on time," Sarah said, giving me a quick hug before hurrying back to the kitchen. At 39, she'd grown into the kind of woman Martha would have been proud of, or at least, I thought so then. The dining room was set for 6. Sarah and her husband, Derek, their twin boys, Jake and Michael, who were 15, their 12-year-old daughter, Emma, and me. Derek was already seated at the head of the table, scrolling through his phone with that self-important air he'd perfected over the 8 years he'd been married to my daughter. Derek worked in sales for some tech company, always talking about deals and commissions and how he was going to make it big someday. He was one of those men who wore expensive suits, but somehow always looked like he was playing dress-up. 42 years old and still trying to convince everyone he was destined for greatness. "Frank," he said without looking up from his phone, "how's retirement treating you?" The way he said my name always grated on me, never Dad or even Mr. Morrison. Just Frank, like I was some guy he barely knew instead of the father of his wife. "Can't complain," I replied, taking my usual seat at the far end of the table, keeping busy with the garden and my woodworking. Emma, bless her heart, immediately perked up. "Grandpa, did you finish the birdhouse you were making me?" "Almost done, sweetheart. Just need to add the finishing touches." The boys mumbled their hellos, too absorbed in their own phones to give their grandfather much attention. I didn't take it personally. 15-year-olds have more important things to worry about than making small talk with their grandfather. Sarah emerged from the kitchen carrying a platter of perfectly golden roast chicken, her face flushed from the heat of cooking. She'd always been a wonderful cook, learned from watching Martha in the kitchen all those years. "This looks incredible, honey," I said and meant it. Sarah beamed with pride, the same way she had when she was 8 years old, and brought me her first attempt at chocolate chip cookies. The conversation during dinner was typical family fare. The boys talked about their upcoming basketball season. Emma chattered about her science project on volcanoes, and Sarah shared updates about her part-time job at the local library. I listened, asked questions, tried to be the engaged grandfather and father I'd always strived to be. Then Derek's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and immediately answered, despite Sarah's disapproving look. "Yeah, Peterson, what's up?" The conversation lasted about 5 minutes, with Derek speaking in that overly loud voice people use when they want everyone around them to know how important their phone calls are. When he finally hung up, he had that smug expression that meant he was about to share something he thought would impress us all. "A big client wants to move forward with the Henderson account," he announced. "This could mean a promotion and a $20,000 bonus." "That's wonderful, Derek," Sarah said, reaching over to squeeze his hand. I nodded politely. "Congratulations. Hard work paying off." Derek leaned back in his chair, that self-satisfied smile spreading across his face. "You know, Frank, it's funny how life works out. Some people spend their whole lives scraping by, working blue-collar jobs, never really amounting to much." He paused, his eyes meeting mine across the table. "And then others figure out how to play the game and actually succeed." The comment stung, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd worked construction for 42 years, built a good life for my family, put food on the table, and a roof over our heads. There was no shame in honest work, though Derek clearly saw it differently. Dad worked hard his whole life, Sarah said quietly. But there was no real force behind her words. She'd learned to keep the peace rather than defend anyone, even her own father. "Oh, I'm not criticizing," Derek continued, cutting into his chicken with unnecessary force. "I'm just saying there's a difference between working hard and working smart. Some people never learn that lesson." Emma looked confused, sensing the tension but not understanding it. The boys remained focused on their food, probably used to their father's need to put others down to build himself up. I took a sip of water, choosing my battles carefully. Martha always said that Derek felt threatened by me, that his comments came from his own insecurities. "Be patient with him," she'd whispered during one of our last conversations. "Sarah loves him, and that has to be enough." But then, Derek's phone rang again. This time, it was his mother, calling to check on him after a minor medical procedure she'd had the week before. Derek spent 10 minutes cooing over her, asking about her recovery, promising to visit soon. The contrast was striking. Here was a man who could show genuine care and concern for his own mother while treating his wife's father like an inconvenience. When he hung up, the conversation somehow shifted to family care and expenses. "Mom's medical bills are really adding up," Derek said, shaking his head. "But what can you do? Family comes first, right? You take care of the people who took care of you." Sarah nodded sympathetically. "Of course. Your mom was always so good to us." "Exactly," Derek continued. "That's the difference between real family and—" He gestured vaguely in my direction. I felt my jaw tighten. "What's that supposed to mean?" Derek shrugged, as if his meaning should be obvious. "I'm just saying some family members are assets and others are liabilities. Take my mom. She raised me, sacrificed for me, made me the man I am today. When she needs help, it's an honor to provide it." The implication hung in the air like smoke. I could see Sarah shifting uncomfortably in her seat, but she said nothing. The children continued eating, either oblivious to the undercurrent or pretending to be. "And then there are family members who—" Derek paused, pretending to search for the right words. "Well, let's just say some people become more of a burden as they get older. Medical expenses, constant needs, taking up time and resources." My hands clenched into fists under the table. 4 years ago, when Martha was dying, Derek had made similar comments. Never directly, always couched in general terms. But the message was clear. My wife's illness had been an inconvenience to him, a drain on his family's resources. But what came next was worse than anything I could have imagined. Derek looked directly at me, that cruel smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You know what's funny, Frank? Sometimes I think it would have been better if you'd been the one to get sick instead of Martha. At least she was useful around here, helped with the kids, brought home cooked meals, actually contributed something." He chuckled as if he'd just told a harmless joke. "Such a shame you didn't die in her place. She would have given us a lot less expenses and a lot more help." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach, all the air knocked out of my lungs. This man, this person my daughter had chosen to build a life with, had just told me he wished I was dead instead of my beloved wife. And then, impossibly, it got worse. Sarah let out a nervous giggle. Not outrage, not shock, not even embarrassment. A giggle. Emma covered her mouth and started laughing, the kind of infectious laughter children get. When they think they're hearing adult humor, they don't quite understand. Jake and Michael looked up from their phones long enough to snicker, following their father's lead like dutiful sons. Even Sarah, my own daughter, was smiling. "Derek, you're terrible," she said. But she was laughing as she said it. They were all laughing, at the thought of me dying instead of my wife, at the idea that my death would have been preferable, more convenient for them. I sat there surrounded by my family, listening to them laugh at the cruelest thing anyone had ever said to me. In that moment, I understood with crystal clarity that I wasn't really family to them. I was exactly what Derek had called me, a liability, a burden, someone they tolerated out of obligation rather than love. The laughter continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. When it finally died down, Derek was still grinning, pleased with himself for getting such a good reaction to his joke. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady. "Excuse me," I said quietly. "I need to use the restroom." Nobody seemed to notice the tremor in my voice or the fact that my hands were shaking. They'd already moved on to other conversation, the moment of cruelty forgotten as quickly as it had occurred. I walked upstairs to the guest bathroom, my mind reeling. 4 years. For 4 years, I'd been coming to these dinners, believing I was welcome, believing I was loved. How many other jokes had I missed? How many times had they laughed about me behind my back? But as I stood there, staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, I realized something else. Something that changed everything. I did have power in this situation. I had something that could wipe that smug smile off Derek's face permanently. Something I'd kept secret for 4 years. Something I'd hoped I'd never have to use. I walked down the hallway to the guest bedroom where I sometimes stayed when I visited. In the closet, hidden behind old photo albums and Christmas decorations, was my overnight bag. And in that bag, carefully wrapped in plastic and hidden in a false bottom I'd constructed myself, was an envelope. An envelope I'd discovered 4 years ago, just weeks after Martha's funeral. An envelope that contained information that would destroy Derek's perfect little world and show my daughter exactly what kind of man she'd married. I'd kept it secret all this time, telling myself I was protecting Sarah and the children. But sitting in that dining room, listening to my own family laugh at the idea of my death, I realized I'd been protecting the wrong people. My hands were steady now as I retrieved the envelope. 4 years of keeping this secret, 4 years of letting Derek treat me like garbage while knowing I could destroy him at any moment. The laughter from downstairs drifted up to me, and I could hear Derek's voice rising above the others, probably telling another story about his own importance. I tucked the envelope into my jacket pocket and took a deep breath. When I walked back down those stairs, everything was going to change. Derek had made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed that a quiet, grieving widower was powerless, that years of staying silent meant I had nothing to fight back with. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, the envelope heavy in my hands, and let my mind drift back to a time I'd tried so hard to forget. 4 years ago, when the world still made sense and Martha was still here to hold me together when everything felt like it was falling apart. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday in March. Stage 4, pancreatic cancer. The doctor's words had echoed in that sterile white room while Martha held my hand, her grip surprisingly strong for someone who'd just been handed a death sentence. How long, I'd asked, my voice barely above a whisper. With treatment, maybe 18 months. Without it, perhaps 6. Martha had squeezed my hand tighter. "We'll take whatever time we can get," she'd said with that quiet dignity that had made me fall in love with her 40 years earlier. What followed were the hardest 18 months of our lives, but also, strangely, some of the most precious. We'd faced Martha's illness together the way we'd faced everything else in our marriage. She was determined to fight, to see Emma grow up a little more, to maybe catch one more Christmas with the grandchildren. I'd retired early to take care of her. 42 years of construction work had left me with a decent pension and some savings, enough to get by. But taking care of a cancer patient, even with insurance, was expensive. The co-pays, the medications, the special food she needed when the chemo made everything taste like metal. It all added up. That's when Derek first started making his comments. "You know, Frank," he'd said during one of those awful family meetings about Martha's care, "maybe it would be better to look into some kind of facility. This is putting a lot of strain on everyone." I'd stared at him in disbelief. "A facility? She's my wife. She's staying home with me. I'm just saying the costs are really mounting up, and Sarah's been driving over here every day to help. It's affecting her work, affecting the kids." Sarah had jumped in quickly. "Derek, Dad can handle it. Mom wants to be home." But I'd seen the look in Derek's eyes. Not concern for Martha or even for Sarah. Annoyance, like my wife's cancer was somehow inconveniencing him personally. The comments continued throughout Martha's treatment. All was subtle, all was framed as practical concerns. Maybe you should consider the financial impact on the family. We need to think about what's realistic here. Some people reach a point where it's kinder to let go. I'd bitten my tongue every time, focused on Martha instead of Derek's selfishness. My wife needed me to be strong, to be her advocate, to fight for every moment we could have together. And we did fight. Martha endured 3 rounds of chemotherapy, radiation, experimental treatments that left her weak and nauseated, but somehow still determinedly herself. She insisted on continuing her weekly dinners with the family as long as she could manage it. She wanted normalcy for the children, wanted them to have good memories of their grandmother. Derek barely tolerated these dinners. He'd check his phone constantly, leave early for work calls, make it clear that spending time with his dying mother-in-law was a burden he was graciously shouldering. But Martha saw through him. She always had. "Frank," she'd whispered to me one evening after a particularly tense family dinner, "Derek's not who we thought he was." "What do you mean?" "Watch him. Really watch him. The way he looks at Sarah when she's helping me, like she's betraying him somehow. The way he talks about money when he thinks I can't hear. The way he treats you like you're already a burden he's planning to inherit." I'd protested, said she was reading too much into things, that the stress of her illness was making her see shadows where there were none. But Martha had always been perceptive about people. It's why she'd been such a good mother, such a wise friend to so many. She could see the truth in people that others missed. "Just promise me something," she'd said, her voice weak but urgent. "Promise me you'll protect yourself after I'm gone. Don't let him push you aside. You're not his problem to solve, and you're not going anywhere." I'd promised, of course. At the time, I thought she was worried about me being lonely, about Derek not including me in family gatherings. I had no idea what she'd already discovered. Martha died on a Thursday morning in September, exactly 19 months after her diagnosis. She'd beaten the doctor's timeline by 1 month, stubborn to the very end. I held her hand as she slipped away, her breathing finally peaceful after months of struggle. The funeral was everything Martha would have wanted. Simple, dignified, filled with the people who'd loved her. Derek played the role of the devoted son-in-law perfectly, making sure everyone saw him comforting Sarah, helping with arrangements, being the strong support system the family needed. But I was watching him now, the way Martha had taught me to watch, and I started noticing things. The way his phone buzzed constantly during the funeral service, and how he'd quickly silence it with an annoyed expression. The woman in her 30s who attended the service but sat in the back, never approaching the family. The way Derek's eyes found her several times during the ceremony, quick glances that spoke of familiarity. I might have dismissed it as grief making me paranoid, but Martha's words kept echoing in my head. Watch him. Really watch him. So I did. 2 weeks after the funeral, I was cleaning out Martha's desk when I found the first piece of evidence, a credit card statement that had been delivered to our house by mistake. It was addressed to Derek, but somehow ended up in Martha's pile of medical bills. The statement showed charges at restaurants I'd never heard of, a hotel in downtown Springfield, flowers from an expensive florist, all on dates when Derek had supposedly been working late or traveling for business. The same dates when Sarah had been at our house helping me take care of Martha. I stared at that credit card statement for an hour, my hands shaking with a rage I hadn't felt since the day Martha got her diagnosis. While my wife was dying, while Sarah was exhausting herself trying to care for her mother and keep up with her own family responsibilities, Derek had been living a double life. But the statement was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, as I slowly sorted through Martha's things, I found more pieces of the puzzle. A receipt that had fallen behind her desk from a private investigator. Martha had hired someone to follow Derek. The receipt led me to a manila folder hidden in Martha's craft room, tucked behind skeins of yarn and fabric scraps. Inside were photographs, phone records, and a detailed report dated just 3 weeks before Martha died. Derek Hoffman had been having an affair for over 2 years. The woman's name was Jessica Torres, 28 years old, worked as his secretary at the tech company. The photographs showed them together at restaurants, holding hands in parking lots, entering and leaving the downtown hotel where Derek apparently kept a regular room. But what made my blood run cold was the timeline. The affair had started just 6 months after Martha's diagnosis. While our family was falling apart, while Sarah was driving herself into exhaustion, trying to balance work and helping with her mother's care, Derek had been seeking comfort in the arms of another woman. And there was more. Phone records showing hundreds of calls and texts between Derek and Jessica, often during family dinners or visits to our house. Hotel receipts showing that Derek had taken Jessica away for romantic weekends while telling Sarah he was at work conferences. The most damning evidence was a recording Martha had somehow obtained, probably through the private investigator. Derek's voice, clear as day, talking to Jessica about his situation. "The old lady's not going to last much longer," Derek's voice said through the cheap speakers of Martha's old cassette player. "Maybe another month or two. Then I can stop pretending to give a damn about all this family bonding bullshit." Jessica's voice responded, younger and breathy. "What about Sarah? Is she going to be a problem?" Derek laughed, a sound that made me want to put my fist through the wall. "Sarah? She's too wrapped up in playing the perfect daughter to notice anything. And honestly, after all this stress with her mother, she'll probably be grateful that I stuck around. Loyalty points, you know?" "And the old man? Frank?" Another laugh from Derek, colder this time. "Frank's not going to be our problem much longer. Guy's already falling apart without Martha. Give it a year, maybe 2, and he'll either be in a nursing home or dead. Either way, not our concern." I'd turned off the recording there, unable to listen to anymore. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely operate the buttons. Martha had known. In her final weeks, when she should have been focused on saying goodbye, on making peace with her illness, she'd been uncovering the truth about the man our daughter had married. She'd been protecting us, even as she was dying. And she'd left this information for me to find, carefully hidden, but not so hidden that I'd never discover it. She'd known I'd eventually clean out her things, known I'd find the folder. But why hadn't she told Sarah while she was still alive? Why leave it for me to handle? I found the answer in a letter Martha had written, dated just 1 week before she died. Her handwriting was shaky from the medication, but her words were clear. "My dearest Frank, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've found what I discovered about Derek. I know this must be devastating, and I'm sorry to burden you with this knowledge. I didn't tell Sarah because she has enough pain right now. Losing her mother and learning her husband is a cheater might break her completely. But I also couldn't take this secret to my grave, because I know Derek will hurt her eventually. Men like him always do. I'm leaving this choice to you, because I trust your judgment more than anyone's. You'll know when the time is right, if the time is ever right. Maybe Derek will change. Maybe he'll end the affair and become the husband Sarah deserves. But if he doesn't, if he continues to hurt our family, then you'll have what you need to protect her. Use this information wisely, my love. Use it only if Sarah is truly in danger, or if Derek becomes a threat to you or the children. But know that whatever you decide, I support you completely. I love you forever, Martha." I'd sat in that empty house, surrounded by the evidence of my son-in-law's betrayal, and made a decision. I would wait. I would watch. I would give Derek every possible chance to prove Martha wrong, to end his affair and become the man my daughter thought she'd married. For 4 years, I'd kept that secret. 4 years of watching Derek continue to disrespect me, continue to treat Sarah like she was lucky to have him, continue to act like the grieving son-in-law while probably still carrying on his affair. 4 years of Thursday dinners where I bit my tongue when Derek made his snide comments about burden and usefulness. 4 years of watching my daughter make excuses for a man who didn't deserve her loyalty. But tonight, when Derek had looked me in the eye and said he wished I'd died instead of Martha, when my own family had laughed at that cruelty, I realized Martha's conditions had been met. Derek wasn't just continuing to hurt our family, he was escalating. And sitting downstairs in that dining room, still probably telling jokes about my death, was a man who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. I looked down at the envelope in my hands. 4 years of keeping Martha's secret. 4 years of hoping I'd never have to use this information. But Derek had made his choice tonight. He'd shown me exactly who he was, and more importantly, he'd shown me that my daughter and grandchildren were living with a man who had no respect for family, no loyalty, no basic human decency. It was time to honor Martha's final wishes, time to protect our family from the predator they'd unknowingly welcomed into their home. I stood up, straightened my shoulders, and headed back downstairs. The laughter had died down, and I could hear Derek holding court again, probably telling another story about his latest business triumph. When I walked back into that dining room, I wasn't the same man who'd left it 20 minutes earlier. I was no longer the quiet, grieving widower who absorbed insults and endured disrespect for the sake of keeping peace. I was Martha's husband, and I had a job to finish. When I returned to the dining room, Derek was in the middle of another story about his business prowess, gesturing with his fork while the family hung on his every word. The scene looked so normal, so perfectly domestic, that for a moment I almost convinced myself I'd imagined his earlier cruelty. But the envelope in my jacket pocket was real. The weight of Martha's final gift pressed against my chest like a talisman. "There he is," Derek said as I took my seat. "We were just talking about the Henderson account. This deal's going to change everything for us." Us, as if I were somehow part of his success story. "That's wonderful," I said quietly, cutting into my chicken that had grown cold during my absence. Sarah looked at me with mild concern. "Dad, are you feeling all right? You look a little pale." "Just tired," I replied. "You know how it is at my age." Derek snorted. "Yeah, we all know how it is. That's why some people need to start thinking about the future, making practical decisions about care and support." There it was again, the subtle dig about my becoming a burden. But this time, instead of feeling hurt, I felt something else entirely. Pity. This man had no idea what was coming. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of ordinary conversation. Emma showed me a drawing she'd made at school. The boys discussed their upcoming basketball tryouts, and Sarah fretted about the library's budget cuts. Normal family talk, the kind that had sustained us through years of Thursday dinners, but I was no longer really present. My mind kept drifting to the contents of that envelope, to the photographs and recordings that would shatter this illusion of domestic bliss. After dessert, Derek excused himself to take a work call, stepping out onto the back patio with his phone pressed to his ear. Through the sliding glass door, I could see him pacing back and forth, his voice animated as he spoke to whoever was on the other end. "He works so hard," Sarah said, following my gaze. "Sometimes I worry he's going to burn himself out." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. At 39, she still had the earnest expression she'd worn as a child, still believed the best about everyone around her. She'd inherited Martha's trusting nature, along with her green eyes. "Sarah," I said carefully, "are you happy?" She blinked, surprised by the question. "Of course I'm happy, Dad. Why would you ask that? Sometimes I wonder if Derek appreciates what he has. You, the children, this life you've built together." Sarah's expression grew guarded, the way it always did when anyone questioned her marriage. "Derek's a good husband and father. He provides for us. He's ambitious. He wants the best for our family. But does he make you feel valued? Loved?" "Dad, what's brought this on?" I almost told her then. Almost pulled out the envelope and laid everything bare on her dining room table. But Emma was still sitting there, coloring in a book, while the adults talked, and the boys were within earshot in the living room. "Nothing specific," I said instead. "I just want you to know that you deserve to be cherished. You deserve someone who treats you like the treasure you are." Sarah reached over and patted my hand. "You're sweet, Dad, but I'm fine." "Really?" Derek's voice rose outside, and we both turned to look. He was gesturing emphatically, his face flushed with excitement or anger. The call went on for another 10 minutes before he finally came back inside. "Great news," he announced as he slid the patio door shut. "The Henderson deal is definitely moving forward. Peterson thinks I'm looking at a promotion to regional manager." "That's fantastic, honey," Sarah said. But I noticed she didn't get up to hug him. There was a distance there, subtle but unmistakable, once you knew to look for it. Yeah, well, it's about time they recognized my potential, Derek continued. I've been carrying that department for years. I watched him as he settled back into his chair, reaching for his wine glass with the satisfied air of a man who believed his own hype. This was the same man who had wished death on me 2 hours earlier, now playing the role of devoted family man. You know what this means? Derek said, his eyes gleaming. We might finally be able to afford that house in Millbrook, the one with the gated community and the country club membership. Sarah's face lit up for the first time all evening. Really? You think we could qualify for the mortgage? With this promotion and bonus, absolutely. We'd be moving up in the world, giving the kids the kind of advantages they deserve. I felt a chill run down my spine. Millbrook was 40 minutes away, an exclusive community where houses started at $800,000. If Derek moved my daughter and grandchildren there, they'd be completely under his control, isolated from anyone who might question his behavior or offer Sarah support. What about the kids' schools? I asked. They're doing so well where they are. Derek waved dismissively. Millbrook has some of the best private schools in the state. The twins would have opportunities they could never get here. Private school is expensive, I pointed out. Not when you're making the kind of money I'll be making, Derek replied, with that smug confidence that had always rubbed me wrong. Besides, some things are worth the investment. I looked around the table at my family. Sarah was already mentally decorating their new house. The boys were excited about the prospect of a community with tennis courts and a pool, and Emma was coloring pictures of what looked like a mansion. Only I could see the trap Derek was constructing. Move them away from their support system, saddle them with enormous mortgage payments that would make Sarah completely dependent on his income, isolate them in a community where appearances mattered more than substance. It was a classic move from a man who wanted total control over his family. After the dishes were cleared and the children had gone upstairs to do homework, I found myself alone with Derek in the living room while Sarah finished cleaning the kitchen. He was scrolling through his phone again, probably checking email or social media. "Derek," I said quietly, "can I ask you something?" He looked up with barely concealed impatience. "What's up, Frank? Do you love my daughter?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "What kind of question is that?" "A simple one. Do you love Sarah?" Derek set his phone down and studied me with narrowed eyes. "Of course I love her. We've been married 8 years, Frank. We have 3 kids together." "That's not what I asked." He leaned back in his chair, his expression growing cold. "You know, Frank, I'm getting a little tired of these conversations. Every time we're together, you seem to have some problem with me. Some question about my commitment to this family. I've never said anything about your commitment. You don't have to say it. It's in your tone, your looks, the way you question everything I do." Derek's voice was rising slightly, and I could hear the anger beneath his words. "I've been nothing but patient with you, especially after Martha died. But frankly, your attitude is getting old." I felt a flash of the old anger, the urge to defend myself against his accusations. But then I remembered the envelope in my pocket, and a strange calm settled over me. "You're right," I said. "I do question your commitment, and after tonight, I think I know why." Derek's eyes sharpened. "What's that supposed to mean?" "That joke you made at dinner, about wishing I'd died instead of Martha. That wasn't about money or convenience, was it? That was about getting rid of anyone who might see through your act." For just a moment, Derek's mask slipped. I saw something calculating and cold flicker across his features before he forced his expression back to one of wounded innocence. "That was just a joke, Frank. Dark humor. I didn't mean anything by it." "Didn't you?" We stared at each other across the coffee table, and I could see Derek trying to figure out what I knew, what I suspected. He was smart enough to realize that something had changed in me, that the grieving widower who'd been absorbing his insults for 4 years was no longer quite so compliant. "You know what your problem is, Frank," Derek said finally. "You never moved on from Martha's death. You're stuck in the past, suspicious of everyone, looking for enemies where there aren't any." "Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally starting to see clearly." Derek leaned forward, his voice dropping to something just above a whisper. "Let me be very clear about something. This is my house, my family, my life. Sarah is my wife, those are my children, and this is my decision to make. You're here because Sarah feels sorry for you, because she thinks you need family dinners to keep from falling apart completely." He paused, making sure his words hit their mark. "But don't mistake charity for power, Frank. Don't think that because we tolerate you, you have any real say in how this family operates." I nodded slowly, as if absorbing the truth of his words. "You're absolutely right, Derek. I don't have any power here." He smiled, satisfied that he'd put me back in my place. But Martha did. The smile faltered. "What?" I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope, setting it on the coffee table between us. Derek's eyes fixed on it immediately, his face going pale. "This is what Martha left for me," I said quietly. "What she discovered about you in the weeks before she died." Derek stared at the envelope like it was a bomb about to explode. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Jessica Torres." The name hit him like a physical blow. His face went from pale to ashen, and his hands began to tremble slightly. "The downtown Marriott Room 207? The same room you've been renting twice a week for over 2 years. Derek's breathing became shallow and rapid. "Frank, I don't know where you're getting this information, but the recording where you called Martha the old lady and said you couldn't wait for her to die so you could stop pretending to care about family." That last sentence broke something in Derek. His careful composure crumbled completely, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely afraid. "How long have you known?" he whispered. 4 years, since 3 weeks after Martha's funeral." Derek's face went through a series of expressions: shock, fear, anger, and finally, desperation. "Frank, you have to understand." "No," I said firmly, "you have to understand. For 4 years, I've watched you treat my daughter like she was lucky to have you. For 4 years, I've listened to your jokes about burdens and usefulness and family obligations. For 4 years, I've kept Martha's secret because I hoped you might change." I picked up the envelope, feeling its weight. "But tonight, when you looked me in the eye and wished I was dead, when my own family laughed at that cruelty, I realized Martha was right about you. You're not just unfaithful, Derek. You're dangerous." Derek was sweating now, his shirt sticking to his back, despite the cool evening air. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand that everything is about to change." Sarah's voice drifted in from the kitchen, humming softly as she finished cleaning up. In a few minutes, she'd join us in the living room, probably settling in to watch television with her husband and father, completely unaware that her world was about to shatter. But for the first time in 4 years, I wasn't the one who was powerless. Derek was. Derek stared at the envelope for a long moment, his face cycling through emotions like a broken kaleidoscope. Fear, anger, calculation, desperation. I could almost see his mind working, trying to find an angle, a way to turn this situation to his advantage. "What exactly do you think you know?" he finally asked, his voice carefully controlled, but with an underlying tremor that betrayed his panic. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I listened to Sarah humming in the kitchen, the sound of running water as she finished the last of the dishes. Upstairs, I could hear the muffled sounds of the children moving around, probably getting ready for bed. "I know about the 2-year affair," I said quietly. "I know about the hotel room you keep downtown. I know about the credit card charges for romantic dinners while Sarah was sitting beside Martha's hospital bed." Oh. Each word hit Derek like a physical blow. His jaw clenched, his hands gripping the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. "I know about the phone calls during family dinners, the texts you thought no one noticed, the weekend trips you took with Jessica while telling Sarah you were at business conferences." Derek's breathing became more rapid, shallow gasps as if he couldn't get enough air. "But most of all," I continued, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "I know about what you said to her. About Martha. About how you couldn't wait for her to die so you could stop pretending to care about this family." That last sentence shattered whatever composure Derek had left. His face crumpled, not with remorse, but with the terrified realization that his carefully constructed life was about to collapse. "Frank, please, you have to let me explain." "Explain what? How you comforted yourself with another woman while my wife was dying? How you laughed about it with your girlfriend, called Martha the old lady like she was some burden you couldn't wait to be rid of?" Derek glanced desperately toward the kitchen, making sure Sarah couldn't hear us. It wasn't like that. The situation with Martha was just, it was hard on everyone. Sarah was stressed, the kids were upset, and You what? Decided you deserved comfort more than your dying mother-in-law deserved respect? I never meant for it to happen, Derek said, his voice breaking slightly. Jessica and it started as friendship, someone to talk to about the stress at home, but then it became more, and I couldn't stop it. I studied his face as he spoke, looking for any sign of genuine remorse. But all I saw was self-pity and the desperate need to justify his actions to himself as much as to me. How long? I asked. What? How long did you wait after Martha's diagnosis before you started your affair? Derek's silence was answer enough. 6 months, I said, answering my own question. Martha had been fighting cancer for 6 months when you decided you needed emotional support from your secretary. Yeah, you don't understand the pressure I was under. The pressure you were under? My voice rose slightly before I caught myself and lowered it again. Derek, my wife was dying. Sarah was falling apart trying to take care of her mother and your children and her job. But somehow, you were the one who needed comfort? Derek looked around desperately, like a trapped animal seeking an escape route. Frank, I know how this looks, but the affair is over. It has been for months. Jessica transferred to another department. We barely speak anymore. I'm committed to Sarah, to our family. Stop lying. The words came out with such force that Derek actually recoiled. For the first time in our conversation, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. I said, stop lying to me, I repeated. Martha hired a private investigator, Derek. She documented everything. The affair didn't end when she died. It didn't end last year or last month. You're still seeing Jessica Torres, still meeting her at that hotel, still building a life with her, while my daughter believes she's married to a faithful husband. Derek's face went completely white. I don't know where you're getting that information, but I opened the envelope and pulled out a photograph. It was recent, taken just 3 weeks ago, according to the timestamp. Derek and Jessica walking hand in hand out of the downtown Marriott, both of them smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. Derek stared at the photograph like he'd seen a ghost. How did you... Martha's private investigator gave me his card before the funeral. Said if I ever needed to update the file, I should call him. I slipped the photograph back into the envelope. Apparently, men like you are creatures of habit. Same hotel, same room, same day of the week. The sound of Sarah's footsteps approaching from the kitchen made both of us freeze. Derek's eyes went wide with panic, but I remained calm. I'd had 4 years to prepare for this moment. Everything okay in here? Sarah asked as she entered the living room, drying her hands on a dish towel. You two look like you're having a serious conversation. Just talking about the old days, I said smoothly. You know how it is when two men get to reminiscing. Derek managed a weak smile, but said nothing. Sarah settled into her favorite chair, tucking her legs under her in that familiar way she'd done since she was a teenager. I was thinking, she said, maybe next Thursday we could try that new recipe for pot roast I saw online, the one with the wine reduction sauce. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart, I replied, never taking my eyes off Derek. He was sweating profusely now, his shirt damp and his hands trembling slightly. Derek, are you feeling all right? Sarah asked with a genuine concern. You look a little pale. Just tired? Derek managed to croak out. Long day at work. Sarah frowned. Maybe you should go to bed early tonight. You've been working so hard lately. Yeah, Derek said, his voice barely audible. Maybe I should. We sat in silence for a few minutes, Sarah scrolling through her phone, while Derek stared at the coffee table where the envelope lay in plain sight. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how to get Sarah out of the room so we could continue our conversation. But I wasn't interested in making things easy for him. Sarah, I said, would you mind getting me a glass of water? All this talking has made me thirsty. Of course, Dad. She uncurled herself from the chair and headed back toward the kitchen. The moment she was out of earshot, Derek leaned forward urgently. Frank, please, we need to talk about this rationally. Think about what this would do to Sarah, to the children. Do you really want to destroy their family over something that happened years ago? Something that's still happening, I corrected. And yes, Derek, I do think Sarah deserves to know the truth about the man she married. But the kids deserve better than a father who lies to their mother and wishes their grandfather dead. Derek's desperation was reaching new heights. What do you want? Money? I can give you money. The Henderson deal's going to bring in serious cash. I don't want your money. Then what? What do you want from me? I looked at this man who'd been part of my family for 8 years, who'd fathered my grandchildren, who'd stood beside my daughter at their wedding and promised to love and cherish her. I tried to find some redeeming quality, some reason to show mercy. But all I could see was the smirk on his face when he'd wished me dead, the laughter of my family echoing in my ears. I want you to understand something very clearly, I said. For 4 years, you've treated me like I was nothing, like I was a burden you had to tolerate out of obligation to Sarah. You've made jokes about my usefulness, questioned my place in this family, and tonight you actually said you wished I'd died instead of my wife. Derek opened his mouth to protest, but I held up a hand to stop him. But here's what you never understood, Derek. I wasn't powerless. I was patient. There's a difference. Sarah's footsteps were returning from the kitchen. Derek looked at me with the desperate expression of a drowning man watching his lifeline slip away. Frank, please, I'm not going to destroy your family tonight, I said quietly, as Sarah's voice grew closer. But things are going to change, starting now. Sarah appeared with my water, smiling as she handed me the glass. Here you go, Dad. Thank you, sweetheart. I took a sip, then looked directly at Derek. Actually, I think I should head home soon. It's getting late, and I have an early morning tomorrow. Derek's relief was palpable, but I wasn't finished. Derek, would you mind walking me out to the car? I'd like to continue our conversation about those old times. The color drained from Derek's face again, but he had no choice. Of course, Frank. We said our goodbyes to Sarah and the children, going through the familiar ritual of hugs and promises to call soon. But there was a new tension in the air, something Sarah couldn't quite identify but could definitely sense. Is everything okay with you two? She asked as we prepared to leave. You both seem different tonight. Just tired, honey, Derek said, his voice strained. Like I said, long day. Dad? Everything's fine, sweetheart. Derek and I just had a good heart-to-heart. Sometimes that's exactly what men need. Once we were outside in the driveway, away from the house and any chance of being overheard, Derek immediately grabbed my arm. Frank, please, you have to listen to me. The affair with Jessica, it's complicated, but it doesn't change how I feel about Sarah and the kids. I pulled my arm free. Don't touch me. Derek stepped back, his hands raised in surrender. I'm sorry. I need you to understand that I love my family. Whatever you think you know about me, whatever Martha thought she discovered, it doesn't change the fact that I'm a good father and husband. A good husband doesn't cheat on his wife while her mother is dying. It was a mistake that's been going on for over 2 years, a mistake you're still making every week at the downtown Marriott. Derek's shoulders sagged in defeat. What do you want from me, Frank? What will it take to make this go away? I looked at him standing there in his expensive suit, his perfectly styled hair, his desperate expression. For 8 years, this man had been the center of my daughter's world. She defended him, made excuses for him, built her entire life around supporting his ambitions, and he'd repaid that loyalty by building a secret life with another woman. I want you to end it, I said finally. The affair, the hotel room, all of it. End it completely. Derek nodded eagerly. Yes, absolutely. I'll call Jessica tomorrow, tell her it's over. I'm not finished. He fell silent, waiting. I want you to treat Sarah with the respect she deserves. No more snide comments about family obligations or burdens. No more making her feel guilty for spending time with me or missing work to help with the children. Of course, yes. And I want you to treat me with the respect I've earned. No more jokes about death or usefulness. No more making me feel unwelcome in my own daughter's home. Derek was nodding frantically now, agreeing to anything that might save his marriage. But most importantly, I continued, my voice dropping to something deadly serious, I want you to understand that I'll be watching. Every family dinner, every interaction with Sarah, every decision you make about this family's future. I'll be watching, and I'll be waiting. Waiting for what? I pulled the envelope from my pocket one more time, holding it up so he could see it clearly in the porch light. For you to give me a reason to use this." Derek stared at the envelope, understanding dawning in his eyes. This wasn't a one-time confrontation. This was the beginning of a new dynamic in our relationship, one where he was no longer in control. "Frank, you can't. Sarah would never forgive you if you broke up her marriage over something that happened in the past. Then I guess you'd better make sure there's nothing happening in the present to break it up over." I walked to my car, leaving Derek standing alone in the driveway. As I started the engine, I could see him through the windshield, still standing there like a man who'd just watched his entire world shift on its axis. For 4 years, Derek had held all the power in our relationship. He'd been the successful son-in-law, the provider, the man who'd graciously allowed the old widower to join his family for dinner each week. But now the balance had shifted. Now I held something that could destroy everything Derek had built, and he knew it. As I drove home through the quiet suburban streets, I thought about Martha and the courage it must have taken for her to investigate her own son-in-law while she was fighting for her life. She'd known she wouldn't live to see justice done, but she'd trusted me to carry that burden for her. For 4 years, I'd carried it in silence. But Derek's cruelty tonight had shown me that silence wasn't protecting anyone except the man who deserved protection least. The war between Derek and me had begun the moment he wished me dead at that dinner table. But he'd made one crucial miscalculation. He'd assumed that because I was old and grieving, I was also helpless. He was about to learn just how wrong he'd been. The phone call came 3 weeks later on a Tuesday afternoon while I was working in my garden. Sarah's voice was strained, different somehow, and I could hear something in the background that sounded like muffled crying. "Dad, can you come over? I need to talk to you." "Of course, sweetheart. Is everything all right?" A long pause. "Just come over, please. The kids are at school. Derek's at work. We need to talk alone." I found Sarah sitting at her kitchen table, still in her pajamas at 2 in the afternoon. Her eyes were red and swollen, tissues scattered around her like fallen leaves. She looked up when I entered, and I saw something in her expression I hadn't seen since she was a little girl. Lost, confused, desperate for her father to make sense of a world that had suddenly stopped making sense. "Sarah, what's wrong?" She gestured for me to sit down across from her, then took a shaky breath. "I found something in Derek's car yesterday, in the glove compartment." My heart started beating faster, but I kept my expression neutral. "What kind of something?" Sarah reached into her robe pocket and pulled out a small silver bracelet, delicate and expensive looking. It's not mine. I've never seen it before." She turned it over in her hands, her fingers trembling. "It has an inscription. To Jess, my forever love, D." I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. For 3 weeks, I'd watched Derek carefully, waiting to see if he would keep his promise to end the affair. Apparently, he'd decided to test my resolve instead. "Sarah, there's more." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through what looked like a call log. "I checked our phone records yesterday. There are hundreds of calls to the same number over the past 2 years. Hundreds, Dad, always when I was at work or here helping you with Mom." I reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart." "I called the number," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. A woman answered, Jessica Torres. When I said I was Derek's wife, she hung up immediately. Sarah looked at me with those green eyes that were so much like Martha's, searching for answers I wasn't sure I was ready to give. "Dad, how long have you known?" The question hung in the air between us like a sword waiting to fall. I could lie, pretend to be as shocked as she was. But sitting there, looking at my daughter's pain, I realized that the time for protecting people from the truth had passed. 4 years, I said quietly. Sarah's face went through a series of emotions: surprise, hurt, anger, and finally, something that looked like relief. Since Mom died? Since 3 weeks after the funeral. She was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier, stronger somehow. "Why didn't you tell me?" I thought about Martha's letter, about the burden she'd placed on me to decide when the time was right. Because I hoped he would change. Because I thought maybe it was just grief, stress from your mother's illness. Because I didn't want to destroy your family unless I was absolutely certain it was the right thing to do. And now? I thought about Derek's cruel joke 3 weeks ago, about the way my family had laughed at the idea of my death. Now I think you deserve better than a man who can look you in the eye and lie about where he's been, who he's been with, what he's been doing. Sarah nodded slowly, then surprised me by asking, "Do you have proof? Real proof?" I hesitated. Showing her the envelope would mean revealing that Martha had known that her mother had spent her final weeks uncovering her husband's betrayal instead of focusing on saying goodbye. But Sarah was asking, and she deserved the whole truth. "Yes," I said, "I have proof." When I returned from my house 20 minutes later with Martha's envelope, Sarah was still sitting at the kitchen table, but she'd gotten dressed and made coffee. She looked calmer, more resolute, like a woman who'd decided to face whatever was coming. I set the envelope on the table between us, the same way I'd done with Derek 3 weeks earlier. But this time, the gesture felt like offering a gift rather than wielding a weapon. "Your mother discovered this before she died," I said gently. "She hired a private investigator because she suspected something was wrong." Sarah stared at the envelope for a long moment before opening it. I watched her face as she went through the contents, the photographs, the hotel receipts, the phone records, the recorded conversation where Derek had called Martha the old lady, and expressed his eagerness for her death. With each piece of evidence, Sarah's expression grew harder, more determined, but she didn't cry. Instead, she seemed to be building a wall around herself, preparing for battle. "He said he couldn't wait for Mom to die," she whispered after listening to the recording twice. "I'm sorry you had to hear that." Sarah looked up at me, and I was startled by the steel in her eyes. "I'm not sorry. I needed to hear it. I needed to know exactly who I married." She gathered all the evidence back into the envelope, her movements precise and deliberate. "What else do you know? What aren't you telling me?" "The affair is still going on. I had Derek followed for the past month after he made some inappropriate comments at dinner. They still meet every Wednesday at the downtown Marriott." Sarah nodded as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. "Wednesday, his standing client dinner that always runs late." "Sarah, I need you to know that I didn't want to be the one to tell you this. I was hoping that he'd end it on his own." Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Dad, men like Derek don't end affairs because it's the right thing to do. They end them when they get caught or when they find someone better." The front door opened, and we both froze. Derek's voice called out from the entryway. "Sarah, I forgot my presentation folder. Why is Frank's car in the driveway?" Sarah looked at me, then at the envelope on the table. In that moment, I saw her make a decision that would change everything. "We're in the kitchen," she called back, her voice steady and clear. Derek appeared in the doorway, still wearing his expensive suit, his hair perfectly styled. He looked between Sarah and me, his gaze lingering on the envelope with obvious recognition and growing panic. "What's going on?" he asked, but his voice betrayed his fear. Sarah stood up slowly, holding the envelope against her chest like armor. "I found Jessica's bracelet in your car yesterday." Derek's face went white, but he tried to maintain his composure. "Sarah, can you explain the hotel receipts, the phone records, the recording where you called my dying mother the old lady and said you couldn't wait for her to die?" Each question hit Derek like a physical blow. He looked desperately at me, as if I might somehow save him from the consequences of his own actions. "Frank, you promised." "I promised I'd be watching," I corrected, and I was. "You were supposed to end it, Derek. Instead, you bought your girlfriend a bracelet and continued lying to your wife." Derek turned back to Sarah, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "Sarah, please, let me explain. The thing with Jessica, it's complicated, but it doesn't change how I feel about you and the kids." "Stop." Sarah's voice cut through his words like a blade. "Just stop talking." Derek fell silent, his mouth still open with whatever lie he'd been preparing. "I know about the hotel room," Sarah continued. "I know about the 2 years of lies, the phone calls during family dinners, the weekend trips you took with her while I was here taking care of our children." Derek's shoulders began to shake, and for a moment I thought he might collapse entirely. "But most of all," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger with each word, "I know that while my mother was dying, while I was falling apart, trying to be a good daughter and a good wife and a good mother, all at the same time, you were comforting yourself with another woman. Sarah, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Are you? Are you really sorry, Derek? Or are you just sorry you got caught? Derek looked between Sarah and me, desperately seeking some way to salvage the situation. I'll end it. I'll call Jessica right now, tell her it's over. We can go to counseling, work through this. You had your chance to end it, Sarah said quietly. 3 weeks ago, when my father confronted you. Instead, you chose to keep lying. Derek's face crumpled as he realized that his secret meeting with me hadn't been as secret as he'd thought. How did you? Because I know my father, Sarah replied, and I know that he would never have sat on information like this unless he was giving you a chance to do the right thing. She walked to the kitchen counter and pulled out a business card I hadn't noticed before. I called a divorce attorney this morning. I have an appointment tomorrow at 10. Derek's legs seemed to give out, and he sank into a chair. Sarah, please, think about the children. Think about everything we've built together. I am thinking about the children, Sarah said firmly. I'm thinking about what kind of example I want to set for them. I'm thinking about whether I want my daughter to grow up believing that love means accepting lies and betrayal. I'm thinking about whether I want my sons to learn that this is how a man treats his wife. He picked up the envelope from the table, holding it like the evidence it was. But mostly, I'm thinking about my mother, about how she spent her final weeks uncovering your betrayal instead of being able to focus on saying goodbye to her family, about how she died knowing that her daughter was married to a man who couldn't even respect her memory enough to attend her funeral without his girlfriend in the back row. Derek's head snapped up. How did you? The private investigator Dad hired has been very thorough. Apparently, Jessica attended Mom's funeral, sat in the back, left before the reception. While I was burying my mother, your girlfriend was there watching. The silence that followed was deafening. Derek sat hunched in his chair, the weight of his exposed lies crushing down on him. Sarah stood tall and strong, every inch her mother's daughter. I want you to pack a bag and leave, Sarah said finally. Tonight. The children will be home from school soon, and I need time to figure out how to explain this to them. Derek looked up with desperate eyes. Sarah, please, we can work through this. 8 years of marriage, 3 children. 8 years of lies, Sarah corrected. 2 years of active betrayal, and 3 children who deserve better than a father who wished their grandfather dead so he could stop pretending to care about family. Derek's mouth fell open. You heard about that? Dad told me everything, Derek. Everything. Derek turned to me, his expression a mixture of hatred and defeat. You destroyed my family. No, I said quietly. You did that all by yourself. I just made sure my daughter knew the truth about the man she married. Sarah moved to stand beside my chair, her hand resting on my shoulder. Dad protected me for 4 years, hoping you'd become the man I deserved. But you're not that man, Derek. You never were. Derek sat there for another moment, staring at the ruins of his carefully constructed life. Then, slowly, he stood up and walked toward the door. I'll fight this, he said without turning around. The house, custody, everything. You won't get away with destroying me. I'm not trying to destroy you, Sarah replied. I'm trying to save myself. After Derek left, Sarah and I sat in the quiet kitchen, listening to the sound of his car pulling out of the driveway. She was calmer than I'd expected, resolved in a way that reminded me powerfully of Martha. Are you okay? I asked. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. I think I will be. For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe. She looked at me with those green eyes that had seen too much pain, but had somehow retained their strength. Thank you for waiting, for giving me the choice about when and how to face this. Your mother made me promise to use this information only if you were truly in danger. I think his cruelty 3 weeks ago proved that you were. Sarah smiled sadly. Mom always was the smartest person in the room. As we sat there together, father and daughter, united in truth for the first time in years, I realized that Martha's final gift hadn't just been the envelope. It had been the chance for our family to heal, to build something real on the foundation of honesty rather than the shifting sand of lies. The battle with Derek was far from over, but for the first time since Martha's death, I felt like we were fighting on the same side. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new apartment making coffee for 3. It was a Thursday morning, and Sarah would be arriving soon with Emma for our weekly breakfast tradition. The twins had basketball practice, but Emma loved these quiet mornings when it was just the three of us. The divorce had been finalized 2 weeks ago. Derek had indeed fought it, just as he'd promised, but his threats had proven empty. When faced with the mountain of evidence Martha's private investigator had compiled, including updated documentation of his ongoing affair, Derek's lawyer had advised him to settle quickly and quietly. Sarah got the house, primary custody of the children, and a generous alimony settlement. Derek got supervised visitation every other weekend, and the knowledge that his reputation in their small community was thoroughly destroyed. Word had gotten out about the affair, as it always does in places like Westfield, and Derek found himself persona non grata at the country club he'd always dreamed of joining. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who had spent 8 years treating me like I was beneath his social status now found himself looking up at everyone else. A knock on my apartment door interrupted my thoughts. I opened it to find Sarah and Emma, both carrying bakery bags and wearing matching smiles. "Grandpa," Emma rushed forward for a hug, her 12-year-old enthusiasm infectious, as always. "Mom let me pick the pastries today. I got those chocolate croissants you like." "You remembered my favorite," I said, giving her a squeeze. "How's my smartest granddaughter doing?" "I'm your only granddaughter, Grandpa," Emma giggled, the same joke we'd shared for years. "Lucky for you," I replied, following our familiar script. Sarah hung up her coat and gave me a quick hug. At 40, she looked younger than she had in years. The stress lines around her eyes had softened, and there was a lightness in her step that had been missing during her marriage to Derek. "How are you settling in here?" she asked, looking around my small but comfortable apartment. I'd moved here 3 months ago, wanting to be closer to Sarah and the children while still maintaining my independence. "It's perfect," I said honestly. "Close enough to help when you need me, far enough away that you don't feel like I'm hovering." We settled into our breakfast routine, Emma chattering about school while Sarah and I caught up on the week's events. These Thursday mornings had become precious to all of us, a new tradition that belonged entirely to our reconstructed family. "Mom's going on a date Friday night," Emma announced suddenly, causing Sarah to nearly choke on her coffee. "Emma!" Sarah scolded, her cheeks turning pink. "A date?" I asked, raising an eyebrow with mock seriousness. "With whom?" "His name is Michael," Emma said before Sarah could stop her. "He's a librarian at Mom's work. He has a dog named Shakespeare, and he brings Mom flowers sometimes." I looked at Sarah, who was trying to disappear into her coffee cup. "Flowers, huh? That sounds serious." "It's just dinner, Dad," Sarah said, but she was smiling despite her embarrassment. "We've been talking for a few months. He's different from Derek." "Different how?" Sarah thought for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "He listens when I talk. He remembers things I tell him. He treats the children like they matter, not like they're obstacles to our relationship. He helped Jake with his history report last week," Emma added, "and he taught Michael how to throw a curveball." I felt a warmth spread through my chest. After everything Sarah had been through, she was finally allowing herself to be happy again, to trust again. "I'd like to meet him," I said. "Dad?" "Nothing intimidating," I assured her. "Maybe he could join us for dinner sometime. See how he handles the whole family dynamic." Sarah smiled. "I think he'd like that. He's asked about you several times. Wants to know about the man who raised such a strong daughter." "Smart man," I said. "I already approve of him." As we finished breakfast and Emma excused herself to play in the small garden area behind my apartment building, Sarah and I lingered over our coffee. The comfortable silence between us was something we'd rediscovered in recent months, the ability to simply be together without the weight of secrets or unspoken tensions. "I got a call from Derek yesterday," Sarah said finally. I tensed slightly. Derek's supervised visits had been going smoothly, but he'd been making noises about wanting to modify the custody arrangement. What did he want? "To tell me he and Jessica are engaged." I studied Sarah's face, looking for signs of hurt or anger. Instead, I saw something that looked remarkably like relief. "How do you feel about that?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, then laughed softly. "Grateful. If he's focused on building a new life with her, maybe he'll stop trying to interfere with mine." "And the children? How are they handling everything?" "Better than I expected. Emma barely reacts when I mention her father anymore. The twins are still angry, but more at Derek than at the situation. They're old enough to understand that he made choices that hurt their family. Sarah traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger, a gesture she'd inherited from Martha. Jake asked me last week if I was happier now. I realized I didn't have to think about the answer. I am happier. For the first time in years, I feel like myself again. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Your mother would be so proud of you. I think about her every day, Sarah said. About how she knew the truth but chose to protect me until I was strong enough to handle it. About how she trusted you to know when the right time came. She always was the smartest person in any room. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think she'd approve of Michael, of me moving on? I thought about Martha, about the letter she'd written before she died, about the way she'd always wanted the best for our daughter. I think she'd want you to be happy, I said. I think she'd want you to find someone who cherishes you the way you deserve to be cherished. And I think she'd be grateful that you're teaching her grandchildren what real love looks like. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but they were good tears, healing tears. Emma's voice drifted in from the garden singing some pop song while she picked flowers for a bouquet. The sound was pure joy, uncomplicated and free. I never thanked you properly, Sarah said suddenly. For what? For keeping Mom's secret for 4 years, for giving Derek every possible chance to change, for waiting until I was ready to hear the truth. I shook my head. You don't need to thank me for that. Yes, I do. Because I know it must have been torture, watching him treat you badly, listening to his cruel jokes, knowing you could destroy him at any moment, but choosing to protect me instead. Protecting you has been my job since the day you were born, I said simply. That didn't stop when you got married. But it wasn't just about protection, was it? It was about giving me the power to make my own choice about my life. I nodded. Your mother and we raised you to be strong and independent. We couldn't make this decision for you. We could only give you the tools to make it yourself when you were ready. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, then smiled. I'm ready now, for all of it. The future, Michael. Rebuilding our family the way it should be. What does that look like to you? Honest, based on respect and genuine love, rather than obligation or fear. A place where Emma and the boys see what healthy relationships look like, where they never have to wonder if they're valued or wanted. She paused, looking out at Emma in the garden, and a place where their grandfather is honored for who he is, not tolerated as a burden. That Thursday dinner, 3 weeks before your mother found Derek's betrayal, I said, when he made that joke about wishing I'd died instead of Martha. What about it? I realized that night that I'd been living like a guest in my own family, grateful for scraps of affection, accepting disrespect as normal. But that wasn't what Martha would have wanted for me, and it wasn't what she'd want for you and the children. Sarah reached over and took my hand. You're not a guest anymore, Dad. Your family, real family, the kind that builds each other up instead of tearing each other down. Emma ran in from the garden, her arms full of wildflowers and her face flushed with happiness. Look what I picked for you, Grandpa, and these are for Mom to take to work. I accepted the slightly wilted bouquet with the same reverence I'd once shown Martha's perfectly arranged roses. They're beautiful, sweetheart. Thank you. Can we do this again next Thursday? Emma asked. The 3 of us? Every Thursday, I promised, for as long as you want. As Sarah and Emma prepared to leave, I watched them through my kitchen window. Sarah was helping Emma into her jacket, the two of them laughing about something I couldn't hear. They looked lighter somehow, freed from the weight of Derek's manipulation and contempt. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from David, Martha's private investigator, whom I'd kept in contact with over the months. Thought you'd want to know, Derek and Jessica had a public argument at the Marriott yesterday. Hotel staff had to ask them to leave. Sounds like paradise isn't quite what they expected. I smiled and deleted the message. Derek's problems were no longer my concern. He'd made his choices, and now he got to live with the consequences. I thought about Martha, about the envelope she'd left me, about the trust she'd placed in my judgment. For 4 years, I'd carried the weight of her final gift, unsure when or if I'd ever need to use it. But Martha had been right about everything. She'd known that Derek would eventually reveal his true nature. She'd known that Sarah would need the truth to set herself free. And she'd known that I would have the wisdom to wait for the right moment. That Thursday dinner 6 months ago, when Derek had looked me in the eye and wished for my death while my family laughed, had been that moment. Not because of the cruelty of his words, but because it had shown me that Sarah and the children were living with a man who saw family as nothing more than obstacles to his own happiness. Martha's envelope hadn't just given me power over Derek, it had given me the ability to free my daughter from a marriage built on lies and restore our family to what it should have been all along. I looked around my small apartment at the photos of Martha and Sarah and the grandchildren on my mantel, at the comfortable furniture that was finally mine to arrange as I pleased. This wasn't the life I'd imagined when Martha died, but it was a good life, an honest life. And for the first time in 4 years, I wasn't carrying any secrets. Outside my window, the sun was setting over Westfield, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Thursday dinner was just ending in houses all across the suburb, families gathering around tables to share food and conversation and love. Some of those families I knew were like mine had been, held together by secrets and silence and the fear of acknowledging painful truths. But some were like ours was becoming, built on honesty and respect and the kind of love that didn't require anyone to diminish themselves to make others feel important. Martha had left me one final gift in that envelope, not just the power to expose Derek's betrayal, but the roadmap to rebuilding our family on a foundation that would last. And as I cleaned up from our Thursday breakfast, already looking forward to next week's gathering, I knew that Martha would be proud of what we built from the ashes of her discovery. We were finally free, all of us, and that freedom was the most precious inheritance she could have left behind.